What's up, guys? I'm Nick Ross, and today I'm coming at you with a hot, fresh, spicy review of The Last of Us Part 2, Naughty Dog's brand new action-adventure game, the sequel to The Last of Us from 2014 on the PlayStation 4. I'm so excited to review this game. The Last of Us Part 2 is the first game to come out on the PlayStation 5, but let's hope it's not the last. I'm a big Last of Us Part 1 fan, and The Last of Us 2 is another great game that I can't wait to give you all of my thoughts and opinions on. So smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, and let's jump right into this review of what I think of The Last of Us. It's really one of the rare beloved games of the past decade that not only didn't demand a sequel, but actively seemed to, resist the idea of one. Its story is poignant enough because of how self-contained it is, but with The Last of Us Part 2, developer Naughty Dog rises to the challenge and could not only bring together this complex and brutally emotional story that gives it a reason to exist, but also a deep and satisfying evolution of the original and its third-person action stealth gameplay. I mean, really, what more can you want in a game? You've got Joel, you've got Ellie, you've got the whole gang. All the characters were so well acted and well played in this game, and among other reasons, right off the bat, I promise there will be no spoilers in this review. I'm not going to ruin it for you other than what Sony's already shown in their trailers and gameplay. Part 2 starts out seemingly simple, taking place about 4 years after the end of The Last of Us, and setting an older, angrier, and still, well-meaning Ellie on a quest for revenge that sort of hones in on the cycles of violence that can plague humanity as much as any infection. As it grows into something further reaching and ambitious, it knowingly leans into, and often subverts, really, the tropes of the genre, such as guilt by association and the inevitable escalation of an eye for an eye. Games are often defined by giving the power to choose what happens to the player, but The Last of Us and Part 2 concern themselves more with a specific depiction with characters. We're asked to take them as they are, and that leads to some of the most fully realized characters in gaming. And I always empathized with these characters, even if I didn't always agree with them. It delivers experiences that are incredibly memorable for how uncomfortable and challenging it is to be forced to act them out yourself. There's just so much happening in this game, and I think it's sort of profound. Actors Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson return and add so much heart, honesty, and joy, plus sadness to their roles as Joel and Ellie. Ellie is the protagonist of Part 2, and the focus on her, it sort of focuses on her frustrating and frightening moments of her life. It all stays true to what the original game established, while deepening my understanding of Ellie. Troy Baker, is no less fantastic as Joel, even though Part 2 is more focused on Ellie. He sells the weariness of a man who's taken, a ton of lives to save his own, and the lives of those he cares about. And he's made questionable moral decisions out of love, more or less. There's also this great cast of supporting characters introduced in this game, like Shannon Woodward's instantly charming Dina. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, though, in the most spoiler-free of terms, the incredible performance by Laura Bailey. Like so many of The Last of Us' characters, calling this new character purely good or evil would be reductive. Her motivations are just as legitimate and arguably noble as Joel or Ellie's. Where much of Part 2 takes place in warring Seattle, many characters you'll encounter are, one of the major ways that Naughty Dog avoids the fatigue of the series, such as Uncharted 4's last act. Even though it's about 25 hours long, Part 2 never drags because there's always new voices to hear. Sort of like different than Naughty Dog's used to doing their games, where it's just the same one or two people over and over like in Uncharted. The way that stealth, action, and puzzle sequences play out remains very familiar. That said, Part 2 has taken major steps to add variety, to avoid the repetition that's there at first. And, some of it sort of seems obvious behind behind the scenes. It's silly to think that adding a jump button in 2020 could feel fresh, but Ellie's athleticism most definitely proves to be key to keeping Part 2's combat encounters interesting and surprising over time. Whether you're going in loud or quiet, the scope of these battlefields is great. They take place in areas like multi-tiered shopping malls or fragmented skyscrapers that offer what feels like naturally complex puzzle fights or puzzle bosses or something of that sort. There's always something to sneak around and pick off enemies one by one, or as usually happens to me in the game, you plan to be stealthy, but you sort of get caught and have to scramble to your narrow escape from danger. It's really, really exciting, to be honest. Ellie's moves let you improvise to stay one step ahead of some significantly smarter and, better coordinated enemies. That is, if you can learn to understand the various factions. Seraphites communicate via whistles, and the WLF uses modern weaponry, and the Infected, well, no, they haven't started talking to each other, but their mob mentality is more threatening than ever. New enemies like the Shambler turn noxious and throw bombs that can knock off escape routes, and they obscure other enemies. The returning stalkers become even scarier than before, with smart Pac-Man mentality as they hide away from Ellie's listening mobility. Fights with this mixture of infected enemy types led to several encounters that rivaled the best survival horror experiences I've had. Speaking of horror, Part 2 has some of the most brutal combat animations I've seen in any video game, and it's not played for laughs. I'm not squeamish, but I did sometimes find myself choosing to be stealthy just to save myself from watching this again. Playing non-lethally is often possible, but rarely easy, especially when they loose the dogs on you who can track your scent, even when you're well hidden. You've got this move or you're gonna die, and sometimes that means, like running for your life, which is really intense a lot of the time in a game like this, when the dogs are after you. The artfully detailed and realized locations that Ellie travels through are layered with backstory. It seems as though every room tells a tale of people frozen in time, in the density and detail astonished me. That's especially true of the Uncharted Less Legacy area of the game, which rewards exploration with great character moments. It was also a huge relief that I never once had to find a floating pallet to use as a raft for somebody who couldn't swim like the first game. The environmental puzzles never feel as mindless as the first games because they rely a lot more on contextual challenges that make smart use of Ellie's journey through skyscrapers, residential neighborhoods, sewers, and much more. It's a wild ride. Those clever designs are addressed with some of the most beautiful environments I've seen from the PlayStation 5 generation at any point. The audio design plays a big role. It starts with this moving score by returning composer Gustavo Santaolalla and goes all the way down to the little details. Characteristic for the region, the oppressive thump of rain masks the terrifying noises of the infected that lurk outside. From the slightest hum of the silenced pistols, to the horroring boom of a shotgun, from the guttural screams of the clickers, all the way to something like the muttered self-reflection of Ellie as she kills an enemy. Naughty Dog's post-pandemic world sounds alive. And, it really blew me away. So my verdict for the game, ultimately, when it comes down to it, honestly, man, it's really, The Last of Us Part 2 is a masterpiece worthy of its predecessor, frankly. Taking strides forward in every way, Ellie steps into the spotlight and carries this sequel in a manner that feels like the culmination of everything between Naughty Dog's blockbuster storytelling, so memorable. It delivers a layered, emotionally shattering story on top of stealth and action gameplay that really improves the first game's mechanics while integrating a bit more of Uncharted's greater mobility and action. But while Part 2 is a thrilling adventure, it still makes time for a stunning, nuanced exploration of the strength and fragility of the human spirit. The PlayStation 4 has one of its finest exclusives and one of the generation's best games. I give The Last of Us Part 2 a 10 out of 10.